Thank you. Appalachia is home. It's home to some of the most resilient ecosystems in the entire world. Our mountains, our species have survived clear-cut logging, poisoned waters, and new forms of human expansion. Our people from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds in the mountains have formed incredibly valuable connections with the ecology and the land around them. For generations, this has been the trend. We've been connected to nature. The Appalachian Mountains are often considered one of the world's global biodiversity hotspots. This is a really special occurrence because our mountains are unique compared to these other hotspots. The Southern Appalachians are the only temperate mountains in the entire world that have this international level of appreciation. Our species in our mountains are compared from a global conservation perspective with those of the Amazon rainforest, of coral reefs, and of African savannas. In 2019, a University of Copenhagen study found that mountain ecosystems hold 85% of the world's biodiversity. Pockets of habitat allow species to diversify and thrive. That's a very special occurrence, and we are lucky enough to live in Appalachia, a place where this can happen. Despite the fact, though, that Appalachia is right along the heavily populated eastern seaboard, there are still many new discoveries yet to be made. This right here is the Blue Ridge blackbelly salamander, and it's a large and beautiful amphibian that lives in cold, rushing highland streams. But this species was only described last year to science. Their entire global distribution ranges from Clinch Mountain in Tennessee to the mountains of western North Carolina outside of Asheville. It's found nowhere else in the world. But why should we care about biodiversity? In our 21st century lives, it's easy for us to think of ourselves as separate. There are pillars of technology and systems that we try to drive a wedge between ourselves and these other species. But reality begs to differ. Our lives depend on all of these species of pollinators, of wildflowers, and other wildlife that surrounds us. We depend on them, and they depend on us. Every day, scientists are learning about new interactions between species that contribute to our lives on a daily basis. There are species that are benefiting our quality of life, but also our very survival. Richard Louv, a psychologist, determined that nature even has an effect on our mental health. Spending time outside in nature improves our leadership abilities, problem-solving capabilities, and even our empathy for others. Time outside of nature, in contrast, creates the opposite effect. We've already witnessed the destruction of a lot of Appalachian ecosystems. Those that are not obvious, we can kind of see past a gilded exterior of outdoor culture. Our mountains are often considered wild and rugged, untouched and rich in resources. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Our mountains have been affected by us and by other events throughout history that have kind of scarred our mountains. Mountaintop removal is probably the most glaring example, but there are many other ways that mountains can be destroyed. I witnessed these ravens last winter, deep in Southwest Virginia, on a former mountaintop removal coal mining site. They were scavenging on top of a gravel pile. Ravens normally nest on the high cliffs over gorges and tree-cloaked mountains. But these were far from that habitat. As far as I could see, there was bare, rocky ground, no mountain peaks. These ravens were scavenging for food, but these piles of gravel were piled by bulldozers for sale as gravel. People and ravens were scavenging for the same crumbs of mountains that both once loved. We know our ecosystems are resilient and that they constantly change and adapt to all of the challenges brought onto them by humans and other natural phenomena. Dennis Martinez writes that we have a responsibility in ecology. It is kin-centric, and there's a deeply rooted relationship between all of our ancestry and preserving our ecosystems, that it's place-based and only possible if we see ourselves as a greater community, a so-called kingdom of life. Esteemed indigenous botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer shares that the ecosystem works as a bittersweet exchange of gifts between all species. We are a part of this. Wendell Berry, a visionary farmer and activist from Kentucky, sets an example in his writings, but also in his life, that life is possible outside of ecological destruction. And taking it a step farther, Professor David George Haskell of University of the South in Sewanee shares that even our most technologically imbued parts of life, and even our cities, places that we think are not part of nature, are directly correlated with effects happening in the ecosystem outside of those regions. The problems and the strife we face, even in our modern culture, are directly tied to wounds in our ecosystems. We need to re-envision and reimagine our views of Appalachian nature. Our choice is not whether to protect or destroy nature. Our fate kind of lies between two different extremes. We can either choose to be the generation or the people to sever our connection, this valuable connection with free living life that sustains us all. Or we can choose to recognize our interdependence, realize that we have a responsibility and a role to play in these beautiful mountains. How will you protect our mountains?